Do you like screen-wide explosions? Do you never want to learn any boss mechanics ever again? Do you like abusing bugs? Are you tired of playing Deadeye? Are you broke? If you answered yes to any of the previous questions, can I introduce you to Trample Toe Acidic Concoction Pathfinder? The Acidic Concoction consumes 5 of your mana charges to deal a physical damage in an area by throwing a flask projectile on the ground. This part we don't really care about. We only care about the acidic burst that it can cause. If the projectile hits a target that is poisoned, it would consume the poison on the target, so it removes it, and then it'll deal damage equal to the poison damage it would have done throughout the entire duration of that poison itself, multiplied by 150%. So this is actually a life loss. It basically means we can't scale this with hits, we can't scale with this with attack. The only thing we can do is scale the poison damage that it would have done throughout the duration. So poison duration is really important, and poison magnitude is also important here. So let's go over the partner in crime, Vine Arrow. Vine Arrow essentially spawns some plants on the ground, and these plants can be poisoned by hitting an enemy nearby. So the idea is that you shoot your poison burst arrow and it will cause an explosion like that, and any plants caught in it, they'll get poisoned. And then when you throw a flask on top of the poison plant, it will trigger an acidic burst, but it will not consume the poison, and this is the bug we're abusing. This combo is very slow, so this is not something we want to use consistently in maps. It's only needed against very powerful rare mobs or pinnacle bosses. Everything else will clear with a different skill, which I'll explain later. So the real reason why this combination is so busted is because we can spawn 3 of those plants. We can do that by using the Overabundance support gem and using the unique amulet here. So what that means is that if we throw 5 projectiles using Nova projectiles, each of these poison plants can trigger by each individual projectiles we throw on the ground here. So because we're throwing 5 and we have 3 plants, we're triggering 15 acidic burst per throw, which is a lot of damage. Let's start with Poison Burst Arrow. Poison Burst Arrow essentially has 100% chance to poison, so you want to use this as your main skill to poison your plants. It's got a huge attack damage multiplier, and the support gems I went with is Deadly Poison. It's one of the most powerful support gem for any poison attacks in my opinion. 100% more magnitude of poison inflicted with the support skill. We got Close Combat because we want to stand very close to the enemy when we do the Poison Burst attack, and the attack damage will scale the initial damage that it does and therefore scale the poison that it inflicts. Chaos Mastery, yep, extra level, it gives it more attack damage multiplier. Heft is nice. Heft gives it 30% more maximum physical hit damage. So when we shoot an arrow, we utilize our bow's physical damage, and it's got a roll of 184 to 323. This essentially just increases the 323 by 30%, and yeah, and you get a bigger range to roll from, and therefore you potentially can do more damage. And last but not least, prolonged duration. So this makes the poison it does 35% longer, and this only works if you apply the poison via the poison burst arrow. So you can actually read the description of it here. Poison burst. Poison inflicted by this skill is affected by a modifier to skill effect duration. So you can see the default duration is 5.4 seconds. Each level of the poison burst arrow skill will increase the base duration we have here, which is super important. You can think of it as crit chance, right? The higher your base crit chance, the easier you can hit that crit cap if you have increased crit chance. So we have a lot of skill duration multiplier on the tree and on our support gem. So getting a high base is really important, and you can get that level from your amulet. Well, we can't, sorry. You can get that from your bow, and some other places on the tree, and then this support gem as well, to give it a bigger base duration. So we end up having almost 20 seconds, which is really, really strong. Yeah, so the most important skill out of the way, we now have Vine Arrow. It's very simple. We want to spawn an extra plant, so we take this. This gives it more area damage, which we don't really care about, but the less area effect is actually super important here, because if you don't have this, the plants will spawn super far apart from each other, and one flask might not trigger all 3 plants, but if you put this on here, they'll spawn much closer to each other. Yeah, you can see their leaves are almost overlapping. And then, yeah, and that's why we're taking concentrated area, to make each flask we throw more consistent. And then we have prolonged duration just to counteract the overabundance. And then we have multi-shot. Without this, you'll have to use multiple projectiles to spawn all 3 plants, but with this you can use this once and then you can spawn all 3 at once. So let's go to our first aura. Wind Dancer, a very obvious one, I guess. When you get hit, it does a knockback to every enemy around you, and then every enemy is blind because we're an evasion build, and then more area effects, so it affects more enemies around us. The hit it does, it actually does a decent amount of damage, so we instantly leech that as life, and we also make the enemy around us slower. A very good defensive aura when it triggers. And then we have Herald of Plague. Herald of Plague basically spreads the poison of the enemies you kill in a 1.8 meter radius, and also slows them a little by hindering them. Oops. So let's go over our last aura, Plague Bearer. This is the ability that we'll be using to map clear, right? So this is really important, so I'll go over it in a little bit more detail. So Plague Bearer essentially stores all the poison that you do, and then you can release that poison to hit every single enemy around you in a pretty big radius. So one of the main thing we try to do is make sure we can get to that max poison stack as much as possible, right? And the poison it actually does is physical damage, so we can actually scale that pretty well by taking increase to physical nodes. So let's go over our first support gem for Plague Bearer. This gives it an extra level, and the extra level will allow Plague Bearer to store even more damage. Without this as well, so we'll be losing 4 levels. If this was only level 20, you're only storing 15,000 poison damage. So your maximum damage before scaling is like really low, right? So you can scale that by adding an extra level, which will allow it to store a little bit more. And then if you have this is really expensive. This is like 10 div. Essentially gives it a 3 extra level if only 2 other supports are modifying them, which will bring up to level 24. Allow us to store almost 23,000
poison damage, which is really nice. But this is like, this is not an attack, right? This is not it's not an attack, it's a buff, so you can't scale this with generic attacks. You can only scale it by increasing your physical damage or the gem level, which are barely any because there isn't any affixes for increasing the level of buffs, unfortunately. So we'll have to increase that by increasing the physical damage by taking things like Heft. Supported skills deal 30% more maximum physical hit, which I explained earlier. And if you don't have this, you can take some other stuff like bigger AoE or anything that gives you more damage, generic more damage, not attack damage, or generic physical damage. That will increase the damage of this also. Okay, let's go over Acidic Concoction. We don't really care about the damage that it does. We only care about the acidic burst that it can cause. So we can take support gems that lowers the overall damage because it won't affect the acidic burst. So things like Nova Projectile, which is vital to our damage multiplier. Attack speed, so we can throw our flask against the plants quicker. AoE, so it hits all 3 plants even more consistently. Projectile just makes the flask go to the ground quicker. And Culling Strike, I mean, if the flask somehow hits the enemy, then this will kill them. Yeah. And then we have our Toad. Our Toad spawns whenever we kill an enemy. 25% chance to spawn. This comes from our Quiver, which I'll talk about later. So Toads, when they spawn, will path to the nearest enemy, explode with a 100% chance to poison. So this will help with filling our Plague Bearer. So we can further enhance that by increasing the explosion AoE, the magnitude of the poison that it does, so fills out even quicker, blinds any surviving enemies, and also Culling Strike them if they're still alive with less than 10-20% health. Okay, let's go over our passive tree, and let's start with our Ascendancy. We're taking Acidic Concoction, obviously, and then we're taking Sustainable Practices. 50% of our evasion rating also grants elemental damage reduction. This is actually really strong, especially if we have a lot of evasion. I feel like it essentially gives us almost 90% res, and you can imagine that's just very, very strong. But this is really, really nice. This is a must-take node in order to get to that, so Immune to Freeze is the one I chose. And then I'm picking this one, which will give us 6 passive points. This is very helpful for a lot of things. So yeah, I mean, this one can be good, I guess. I don't know, but I don't like it. I've not tried it, but we have so much other important ones that we can take. This one you could potentially take. Essentially, just Herald of Plague, spread your poison to other enemies. Yeah, I mean, you don't need it as long as you're taking this. It's the same thing. Also, like, Herald of Plague is just better in general. It has a bigger meter radius, and it's got 28% to also hinder enemies nearby. Yeah, and this one is not important unless you plan to stack multiple poison on the enemy, which we don't plan to. Those vine plants can only have 1 poison stack, so we're scaling everything with 1 poison stack at all time. And yeah, this also has the downside of 35% less poison duration, which is not what we want because we're scaling that duration, so Acidic Concoction can deal even more damage. And then yeah, but running assault, I mean, whenever you move and shoot an arrow, you'll notice a drastic reduction in your movement speed. This will make it, twice as fast. But the bad thing is that it's a 50% less. It's not a reduced. So if you take other stuff on the tree, that gives you more movement speed, like this, reduce movement speed penalty. This will only half it by like what you already reduced, right? So if you already reduced it by 50%, this will only reduce it further by 25%. So if you do plan to take this, then you shouldn't be taking any other nodes on the tree that reduces the movement penalty. I don't like this because we can take armor that gives you almost 20% reduced movement penalty. And then we can also take a quick one here that's gives you evasion and also 10% reduced movement penalty as well. There are another one here that I'm not taking because I'm not high enough level yet, which will give you almost 50% on its own. And yeah, you don't really need this. If this is reduced, maybe I'll consider it, but yeah, it's not as good. And then this is just, yeah, garbage. Okay, let me just go over the rest of the tree. We're taking a lot of evasion stuff here, and then we're going down here and we're taking attack damage. As attack damage will scale the damage of the poison burst arrow and my frogs, and wind dancer as well because that's an attack. And then skill effect duration obviously will scale the poison burst arrow's poison that it does, and then when it gets consumed, it'll do even more damage. So both of these is a buff to our overall damage. And then yeah, if we go here, then we have just some generic poison magnitude, poison duration, and then just 25% increased magnitude of poison that you inflict. That's the important part there. Then yeah, more poison nodes, skill effect duration, poison duration. You can go here if you want, but I'm saving some nodes for other stuff. We do an insane amount of boss damage already. We don't need to scale that. Like, we can kill Uber Arbiter in 4 seconds. Taking this will allow us to kill it in 3.8, 3.7. I rather take other nodes that gives us more movement speed or defensive ability. So that's the reason why I'm not taking these. You can take these if you want. They are quite nice. Taking this actually is also very nice because it allows us to have 2 stack of poisons, and you can actually clear using Plague Bearer much more consistently. But I don't find it that important, but it's up to you. And then we have, yeah, just a evasion rating thing, and then reduced movement penalty when you shoot and move at the same time. Some generic attack stuff here because there's a movement speed one that's quite nice. Yeah, I'll just scale the generic damage of poison burst arrow. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, maybe we don't need to take these. These are not as good. Like, you don't have to prioritize getting these 3 when you come down here. You can take something else. And then generic evasion rating stuff and deflection, movement speed and skill speed, more deflection stuff, and then yeah, and then just some magnitude of damaging ailments that you do here. For the rest of the tree, yeah, so because we're using Herald of Plague, Herald of Plague gives us chaos damage, which we actually do, which I'll talk about later. We actually have a lot of chaos damage. We get that from gain damage as extra chaos, and then yeah, just more deflection rating stuff, and then generic evasion rating stuff. Yeah, doubles the evasion rating from the equipped body armor, so it's important to get as much evasion on your body armor as possible. And then if you go up here, that's more generic poison stuff, and then increased physical damage as extra. So this is really, really good because not only does it increase the poison burst physical damage, which will allow you to poison for even more damage, it will actually increase the damage of Plague Bearer as well. So it'll gain 8% as extra from 22,000, and because this is a physical damage, it does the poison damage as a physical damage, and then the enemy gets poisoned afterwards. So all these nodes here will actually increase the Plague Bearer's damage because these are generic physical increase. These won't because these only increases attack damage and Plague Bearer is not an attack. And then, yeah, poison on hit, magnitude of poison, poison on hit. Actually, why am I taking this one? I don't need to take this. I can take this off. But this is really nice because if the enemy is not poisoned, this will make the first poison you inflict much more powerful. This happens all the time because in boss fights you can only poison the vines once, and you can't have multiple stacks of poison on them, and then they don't go away if you reapply it on them. They just take the first hit that you do. So that's why you take this to ensure the first poison that you do is strong as possible, because you can only ever have one stack, and then that gets consumed by your acidic flask to do even more acidic burst damage to the boss. And then, yeah, the rest of the nodes here are just more generic poison stuff. Poison duration, probably don't need to take that. Magnitude of poison, and 30% increased magnitude, and recover 2% of maximum life when you kill a poisoned enemy, which will be very nice when you're map clearing, when you're standing in the middle of mobs. They hit you for a bit, you activate your Plague Bearer, kill a bunch of people, and then you just max life again, right? And we further enhance that by taking these nodes here as well. Each of these will give you a total of 4% maximum life on kill. Yeah, it just makes it super nice defensively. You might be wondering, why am I doing all these inefficient pathing here and taking all these nodes? So I have this duel against the Darkness Time Lost Diamond. Essentially, the main thing we care about here is the 4% damage as extra chaos damage. Remember that poison can be caused by both physical and chaos. So this gain 4% of damage as extra chaos will allow you to do even more initial poison damage, and gain 4% means it will actually apply to all generic damage that I do, including Plague Bearer. So Plague Bearer is actually doing a lot of chaos damage, if we can see, which we can't, unfortunately. But that's the reason why I'm taking that, right? We're doing 12% of extra chaos applied on top of Poison Burst Arrow. It's applied on top of everything, right? Especially because Plague Bearer is our map clearing ability, so we definitely want to buff that with extra chaos as much as possible. And the rest of these nodes just gives me fire resistances, because I used a lot of unique armor for my build, so resistances is hard to come by. So definitely prioritize getting that whenever you see them. The rest of my jewels are more basic. This gives you poison duration and the magnitude of the poison you inflict, and then this one more or less the same: attack damage, poison duration, and magnitude of the ailments you inflict. This one is a bit more unique, is a unique jewel which can roll a lot of random stuff. This one, yeah, it's very nice. It's actually very nice. I got this for 2 divines, which I feel like is super cheap. Yeah, if you stand in the middle of a pack and you kill everyone, you just get an insane life regen. I get max health immediately. The gain 10% as damage, as extra chaos. Like, as you can imagine, that makes our initial poison burst arrow do more poison, and it makes Plague Bearer do even more poison, and then evasion rating from equipped body armor is just nice defensive layer. Okay, so our gear, right? We have a bow, which is just a generic high fizz bow, and generic gain damage as extra physical. The extra physical, I believe, will come before the gain extra chaos, so it's like a multiplier on top of a multiplier. The gain will also give Plague Bearer even more damage, which is really nice. And obviously high fizz bow means our poison burst arrow will do even more initial physical damage. And then onslaught, it's just whenever, if we do want to use poison burst arrow, it kills someone, we can get a burst of movement speed. The all attack is really nice. You can go with all projectile. I think that will be cheaper for you to get, but the all attack will give you like attack on the toad, which will do even more damage. It will give you levels on like Wind Dancer, which will make it even more explosive if it knocks back anyone. Yeah, it doesn't apply to Plague Bearer because it's not an attack. It's only a buff, which is unfortunate because it would be so nice. But yeah, you can just go with projectile skills if you want. That's not going to hurt anyone. But if you can get the attack, it'll give your Toad and your Vine Arrows slightly more damage. But the important thing is you want levels to Poison Burst arrows so you can get the duration, right? So you might be wondering, why am I not taking runes that gives you more physical damage on the bow? Well, gain 39% of damage as extra chaos is essentially the same thing, right? Because both physical and chaos can poison enemies. But on top of that, the generic gain can apply to Plague Bearer as well. So this will further buff Plague Bearer's generic damage. And then we have our amulet. This is a must take. This gives you an extra plant, additional multiplier when you fight against bosses. And I'm allocating pure chaos. Pure chaos is essentially 11% as extra. Yeah, as I already explained, any chaos damage will increase the initial poison burst damage that it does, and therefore more poison damage it can trigger on the acidic burst. And then yeah, they also buffs the Plague Bearer damage as well. Both of my rings are just very generic, like life, added physical, resistances, life, added physical, resistances. For my armor, yeah, we definitely want the implicit that gives you reduced movement penalty. Just makes shooting and moving so much better, right? And then yeah, just life, resistances, deflection rating, evasion, get as high as evasion as possible, and then use runes to increase the evasion of your body armor. And then yeah, then gloves, the same thing. Life, evasion, resistances, deflection rating, added physical. Then you can also slot in this rune, which increases the magnitude of your poison as well, which is also very nice. And then our belt, yeah, it's one of the new unique items from this league, right? It gives you 96% increase effect of your socketed runes, and these sockets are treated as if they were gloves. So as you can tell, like this is a glove specific rune, so when you put these in here, they'll be treated as that, and then the 96% increase will increase their effect to almost 60% increased magnitude of damaging elements. You can imagine how powerful that is if you're running like a poison or a bleed build, right? So this is also a must take. If you can't get a 96%, that's fine. You can run a generic belt if you want to, but yeah, if you can afford it, get one of these. I believe these runes are like 20-25 C each. So yeah, it's not that bad. So our quiver, that's where we get our toads from, right? It gives you added physical damage, increased poison duration, very important. And then blinds target when you poison them, and then we have a combine of 52% chance to poison on hit with attacks, right? This is actually more important than you think. We have so many attacks like Wind Dancer. We have the attacks from, which I'll explain later, the overkill damage. This allows all of them to have a 50% chance to poison. And when those things poison, it will give you Plague Bearer stacks. And that is essentially how we're always maintaining Plague Bearer without ever shooting at arrows. We can just spam right click over and over again. Well, as assuming you're doing that in the middle of a pack, you can just maintain Plague Bearer over and over again. And then yeah, for our boots, this is the reason why we have AoE screen wide explosions. Deal 30% of overkill damage to enemies within 2 meters of the enemies killed. We do so much damage with Plague Bearer. all our overkill damage will kill the next enemy, and then the next enemy if it's even possible, and each of these overkill damage will get 50% chance to poison on top of what we have already have on the tree. I think Wind Dancer currently has 50% chance to poison. No, 89% chance to poison. Sorry. So the overkill will have a similar number. And this is going to help our Plague Bearer so much. One of the really cool things that we can do in a map is, because Wind Dancer has a 89% chance to poison, if you run out of Plague Bearer stacks and you don't want to left click to reapply the poison, just stand still, wait for someone to attack you. Gale Force from Wind Dancer will apply poison on them, usually enough to immediately fill up Plague Bearer, and you just go again. And then I just have some very generic Life Flask, Mana Flask. Mana Flask charges over time, which is quite nice. Might be useful when you're in long fights, but if you have a fully built setup here, you don't need it. But yeah, like, because Acidic Concoction takes 5 mana charges per throw, this will allow you to maintain that that flask amount if you ever run out. Yeah. And for leveling, if you want to give this build a try, is play lightning stuff as a ranger, right? Play lightning until you get your first ascendancy, and that's when you can take Acidic Concoction, and then you take your Vine Arrows, and you can pretty much kill any boss you want, any tanky mob you want. But before that, yeah, take lightning stuff. It'll help you clear your first ascendancy so much easier. The order of ascendancy I would take is probably this. Then you'll get some more passive points, and then go with this last to make your build like super tanky. As you're leveling, yeah, take the lightning stuff, don't do what I do, but save a bit of gold, refund, then maybe prioritize all the poison stuff first, and then go with this, go with the rest of these, and then yeah, and then do this thing last. But this is kind of nice to boost the Plague Bearer's damage. Maybe when you feel like you're getting one shot a bit too often, you can take some evasion nodes here and here. Yeah, so look for bows with high physical and level 2 attack or projectile gems. Add rune slots, slap runes that gives you physical damage. That will help you with your campaign massively. And then yeah, rest of these are like, before you get to late game, can be any generic gear. Try and get this as soon as possible as well, which requires level 50. Oh, another thing to add, actually making this at the end of the video when I've already finished. This ring gives you essentially 40% of damage with extra chaos, right? So as you can imagine, that's insanely strong, but it's got massive downside. So if you're not playing hardcore and you're struggling in the campaign a little bit, you want faster excuse me, you want faster clear with your Plague Bearer, put 2 of these on, right? You will double the damage of your Plague Bearer, essentially, and you only need to be level 20. You might want to run this late into map as well, when you feel like you've actually improved your damage in other areas, and then you can take this off. And like, these gear are not expensive, right? This bow is maybe 510 divine, but you can go with a lesser bow if it means you killing Uber Arbiter in 8 seconds. If you're skilled enough, that's fine, but if you have this, you can kill it in 4. These rings are very generic, very cheap. This may be a divine. These boots are like 1x. Gloves 10, 20x. This belt with the runes is probably gonna net you 1 or 2 divines, but you don't need it. Amulet is like 2, 3x helmet. 5x. Super cheap stuff. So let me show you what the build kind of looks like in a map. So there's a boss at the end as well, so you can see the damage. So what we're looking for is to apply the initial poison first, and then we can go boom. And we don't need to reapply the poison ever again. We can just boom. Oops. Oh! Yeah, instantly filled back up again because of Gale Force. If you ever fuck up and you use it in like a small wave, just wait to get hit, and then the poison gets refilled again. You don't really need to use Poison Burst Arrow, to be honest. Hit me. Nice. Obviously, that's not really quick, right? Okay, for that, I might have to... Boom. You can saw I threw some vines on the ground, poisoned them, and then threw a flask. Okay, pay attention to the toads we spawned. You see these little things? They can actually kill mobs for you. And they can poison them and give you Plague Bearer stacks. That's awesome. And I don't think I've used Poison Burst Arrow since the tanky mob we had earlier and the initial poison that we want to apply. Which is so nice. Oh. Oh, don't get heavy stunned, guys. Okay, boss is here. Let's prepare the vines. Poison. Throw the flask. As you can tell, the position there wasn't great. The boss physically moved me away from the vines. So positioning is very important there. In any boss fights, right? So always try to position your vines just next to the boss, not on top, because you want to be in the middle of the vines yourself. And then, yeah, the explosion they cause should be enough to cover the boss if the boss is standing next to it. Okay. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. This build is not done. It's not over for me yet. I will keep playing this build. I will try and improve it. If there's any massive improvement to the build, I will post another video. So stay tuned, subscribe, and any questions, post it in the comment section below. I will try and answer the best of my ability. Cheers.